Since before recorded navigation, the Pearl River Estuary, a gaping 30-mile wound of open ocean slicing through the southern coast of China, has been drowning the ambitions of anyone foolish enough to challenge it. This is not a passive body of water. This is a churning predatory corridor where the outflow of one of Asia's mightiest river systems violently collides with the South China Sea, generating tidal currents savage enough to flip steel barges, and where Category 5 typhoons routinely descend with winds exceeding 150 miles per hour, ripping apart anything that dares to stand above the waterline. Dynasties rose and crumbled along its shores without ever bridging the gap. Portuguese colonizers fortified Macau on one bank. British imperialists seized Hong Kong on the other, and for centuries the two sides stared at each other across the hostile water, connected by nothing but slow, vulnerable ferries and the wreckage of schemes that never survived first contact with the estuary's fury. Any rational assessment of this geography produces one conclusion: do not build here. The depth of the shipping channels, the ferocity of the typhoons, the suffocating humidity that corrodes exposed metal within weeks, and the treacherously soft marine clay beneath the seabed, a geological quicksand that swallows foundations and shifts under load, collectively form a defensive barrier that should have made any permanent crossing a mathematical impossibility. The price in blood, capital, and engineering would be obscene. Yet in 1983, a Hong Kong industrialist named Gordon Wu looked across that lethal expanse of ocean and saw not a barrier, but a gold mine. Inspired by the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel in the United States, Wu proposed the unthinkable: a fixed link, bridge, tunnel, and artificial islands spanning the entire Pearl River Estuary to connect Hong Kong, Macau, and mainland China. It was an act of supreme, visionary arrogance. The governments rejected him. The engineers called it impractical. The ocean continued its indifferent assault, but the idea refused to die. This is the story of how 3 governments and an army of engineers spent nearly 4 decades fighting bureaucracy, geopolitics, and the savage physics of the South China Sea, poured over $18 billion into the deep, and built the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge, the longest sea-crossing structure on Earth, learning in the process that conquering an ocean is only the beginning of a war that never ends. To appreciate why this project pushed engineering to its absolute breaking point, you must first understand what the Pearl River Estuary actually is. Forget the glossy drone footage. Before the first foundation pile was driven, this waterway was a merciless gauntlet of intersecting natural forces. The estuary stretches roughly 40 miles across, with shipping channels plunging to depths of over 130 feet, corridors through which thousands of massive cargo vessels transit daily, feeding the economic lifeblood of one of the most densely industrialized regions on the planet. The seabed is not rock. It is a deep, treacherous layer of soft marine clay and loose sediment, a geological trap that actively shifts, settles, and vacuums heavy objects downward. The water itself behaves like a living adversary. Tidal surges rip through the channel with crushing force, while the river's outflow carries an endless torrent of silt that buries anything left stationary for too long. And looming over everything, the annual typhoon season unleashes storms of catastrophic violence. Typhoon Hato in 2017 generated sustained winds of over 110 miles per hour, killing dozens and causing billions in damage across the very region the bridge was being erected. The estuary does not tolerate human intrusion. It punishes it. The pressure to bridge this chasm was not a matter of convenience. It was economic survival. By the late 20th century, the Pearl River Delta had exploded into one of the most productive manufacturing and financial zones in human history, an economic concentration rivaling the GDP of entire European nations. But the geography was strangling it. Hong Kong sat on the eastern bank, Macau and Zhuhai on the western bank, and the only connection was a grueling 3-hour drive around the entire estuary or a vulnerable ferry crossing. Billions of dollars in potential trade, tourism, and integration were bleeding away every single day because the ocean refused to yield. When Beijing launched its Greater Bay Area mega strategy, a plan to fuse 11 cities with a combined population of over 70 million into a single economic superpower, the bridge became not just desirable, but existentially necessary. Close the gap, or watch the region's dominance slowly suffocate under the weight of its own geographic isolation. The engineering solution devised to defeat this environment was a hybrid weapon of staggering complexity. Because commercial shipping lanes in the estuary could not be blocked, any interruption would paralyze international trade. The engineers designed a system that dove beneath the ocean at its most critical point. A 6.7-kilometer immersed tube tunnel, buried under the seabed at depths of up to 40 meters. To transition between the elevated bridge sections and this submerged tunnel, two massive artificial islands were manufactured from scratch in the open ocean, each covering approximately 100,000 square meters. The islands were constructed using 120 colossal steel cylinders, each one 22 meters in diameter and 55 meters tall, weighing 600 tons, driven into the unstable seabed to form watertight cofferdams. It was brute force on a scale the marine construction industry had never attempted. The numbers alone are enough to fracture comprehension. The total structure stretches 55 kilometers, 34 miles, across the open sea, making it the longest sea-crossing bridge tunnel system ever constructed. Engineers consumed over 400,000 tons of steel, a mass equivalent to 60 Eiffel Towers. They poured over 500,000 cubic meters of specialized, salt-resistant concrete into the corrosive ocean environment. The immersed tunnel was assembled from 33 prefabricated concrete segments, each 180 meters long and weighing over 75,000 tons. Monolithic underwater coffins that had to be floated into position, submerged, and aligned on the soft seabed with millimeter-level precision. The entire structure was engineered to withstand magnitude 8 earthquakes, direct collisions from 300,000-ton cargo vessels, and the full apocalyptic fury of a super typhoon. It was designed to last 120 years. The ocean had other plans. When construction officially launched in December 2009, after more than 2 decades of political negotiations, environmental reviews, and engineering feasibility studies, the initial campaign was an explosive display of industrial force. The steel cylinders for the artificial islands were hammered into the seabed with mechanized fury. Dredging ships tore into the ocean floor, displacing millions of cubic meters of silt. Cranes the size of apartment buildings, including the Zhenhua 30, the most powerful crane vessel on the planet, lifted and positioned structural components with a terrifying industrial precision. Milestones fell rapidly. The bridge towers climbed out of the water. The road deck materialized across the horizon. There was a palpable, intoxicating confidence that this ancient barrier was finally being broken. Then the estuary reminded everyone who was truly in command. Nature and bureaucracy conspired in a devastating counterattack that would stretch the project years beyond its original timeline. Typhoons repeatedly halted construction, sending workers scrambling for safety and submerging equipment beneath violent storm surges. The soft marine clay beneath the artificial islands began to shift and settle unpredictably, threatening the structural integrity of foundations that were supposed to be permanent. The immersed tunnel segments, those 75,000-ton concrete monsters, proved agonizingly difficult to position. Engineers described the process of aligning the final closure joint in 2017 as threading a needle beneath the sea, executing a 34-hour precision adjustment that reduced the deviation between segments to less than 1 millimeter. 1 millimeter of error, 40 meters below a raging ocean, and the human toll was brutal. By the time the bridge opened, at least 20 workers had been killed in construction accidents, men who fell from heights, drowned after being swept off barges, or were crushed by collapsing platforms. Hong Kong media dubbed the project the Bridge of Death. The environmental cost was equally devastating. The population of endangered Chinese white dolphins in Hong Kong waters plummeted from 158 individuals in 2003 to just 34 by 2022. A catastrophic 78% collapse driven by habitat destruction, noise pollution, and the relentless disruption of their feeding grounds. Jump to the present. The bridge stands. It opened on October 24, 2018, and the world briefly marveled at the engineering spectacle before moving on to the next headline. But the structure is now locked in a permanent, invisible war with the environment that tried to prevent its existence. The South China Sea has not surrendered. It has merely adapted its assault. Every single day, the corrosive salt-laden air and seawater relentlessly attack the 400,000 tons of exposed steel, attempting to reduce the bridge to a skeleton of rust. A permanent maintenance force monitors, inspects, and recoats the structure in a never-ending cycle of protective treatment designed to hold off the ocean's chemical warfare. The immersed tunnel, buried beneath millions of tons of seabed sediment, must be continuously monitored for settlement, water infiltration, and the slow grinding pressure of the clay above it. Typhoons continue to batter the structure annually. The bridge survived the direct hit of Super Typhoon Mangkhut just weeks before its official opening, a trial by fire that validated the engineering but underscored the permanent threat. And perhaps most haunting of all, the bridge spent its first years as a ghost structure, Designed for 60,000 vehicles per day, it carried fewer than 400 during the pandemic lockdowns of 2020. Even now, with traffic surging to over 15,000 vehicles daily, it operates at a fraction of its capacity, its $18 billion price tag generating a return that accountants struggle to justify. The paradox is suffocating. To the passengers crossing in air-conditioned comfort, the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge is a sleek, seamless marvel, a 30-minute shortcut across a body of water that once took 3 hours to circumnavigate. A postcard, a triumph. But to the engineers who built it and the crews who maintain it, it is a 55-kilometer wound carved into one of the most hostile marine environments on the planet, kept from collapsing by a daily, invisible, enormously expensive battle against salt, wind, sediment, and time. The gap between the commuter's casual crossing and the engineer's quiet dread is as vast as the estuary itself. Monumental engineering across open water is never a conquest. It is a negotiation conducted under extreme duress, a temporary agreement written in steel and concrete that the ocean reserves the right to revoke at any moment. They spent 4 decades arguing, planning, and fighting to close a 30-mile gap, and they succeeded. But the ocean remembers where it used to flow freely. And it has 120 years of that designed lifespan to prove its point. Because sometimes, stretched across the most punishing waters on Earth, suspended between nations that spent decades unable to agree on anything, there is a long, silent, exhausting standoff. A standoff between humanity's desperate need to connect what geography tore apart, the ocean's ancient corrosive insistence on keeping it that way, and the 20 lives, the vanishing dolphins, and the billions of dollars that were sacrificed to hold the line between the two.